I mean, hell, this year alone, we don't even need to separate. He's supposed to do, Lollapalooza for 4 months of the year, and I'm supposed to be touring 9 months of the year. So this is our first year that we're actually going to be separated for any length of time. And what you were just saying about, for instance, calling Detective Terry and stuff, yeah, I mean, if me and Kurt got into a divorce and it came down to a custody battle, I'd win in a second. He wouldn't even put up a fight. I mean, money's not a problem. I mean, money is a problem. I mean, if we get a divorce and I don't have my publishing deal, money will be a problem, but that's not going to happen for quite some time.
Courtney was facing a divorce. Kurt was in the process of leaving Courtney and leaving Seattle when he was found dead. Courtney knew Kurt wanted out of the marriage. Just weeks prior to his death, she asked one of her attorneys to get the meanest, most vicious divorce attorney she could find.
And what I was going to do is go to the Scientology place and get off pills, because I'm still taking pills, and I don't want to take pills anymore.
What are you taking now?
The same pills I was taking before, diet-decoding, Valiums. Well, not Valiums, or Hypnols, the stuff I get from England, from my English doctor. But, I got sick of doing dope a long time ago. I mean, right around the time that whole thing happened with Trent.
I've been making videos and doing the LA thing and the New York thing and being all glamorous, and meanwhile he's been playing like Slovenia, right? And he got real depressed, and he wrote basically a suicide note. There's no real other way. He claims he was leaving me.
The note she was talking about there was the note from Rome, where after Kurt died, she claimed that was a suicide attempt. Out of Courtney Love's own mouth, she said, before she knew that Kurt was going to be found dead, or what was in the immediate future in the next few days, she said, he claims he was leaving me. He claims he was leaving me. That was Courtney Love that said that. Courtney Love said Kurt told her he was leaving her. So that proves right there that all this publicity about him leaving a suicide note in Rome was false. That came from Courtney, not from Kurt.
Rosemary was really, really freaked out by your letter. And, one of the things that Rosemary was talking to me about when all this happened, when everything happened, was how, I said it to Kurt, and during the intervention, these are the people that were there during the official intervention.
Yeah, I know all of the people.
Danny Goldberg, the president of Time Warner, Gary Gersh, the president of Capitol Records, Bert Cates, my A&R guy, Ray, what's his last name? Ray, he does, sales, I guess, not Robert Smith, but the guy under Robert Smith, he came from a punk rock label. Pat Smear, who's an alcoholic. Dylan, who's a junkie. Me, who you consider a junkie, and could be considered a junkie, definitely. Although at the time I certainly wasn't, because it was after Rome. And that's basically it. Luke Woods, for some reason, was there. He was a little publicist, and now he does sales. I guess those are the people that were there. I don't know anybody else that was there. Chris didn't even come. Dave didn't even bother fucking coming. And that's when they made me leave. They had a car, and they're like, go. Yeah, and Janet was there. Janet Billig was there. Jackie Ferry was there.
And that's what his talent is. But socially, he doesn't have one friend. So, I always see on TV where the woman comes in and she's like, there's no way he could have run off with a woman, or there's no way he could have killed himself. I'm telling you, he has no friends.
That was one of the first things she said when Ben and I met her at the hotel rooms. He has no friends. He has no way of getting any money. And again, that's what didn't make any sense. We knew this guy was a multimillionaire, and she's saying that he can't get his hands on any money. That didn't make sense at all. Cobain was in fear of his life. He bought this shotgun before he left to go to rehab in Marina del Rey. Most people at the beginning, especially, and on a lot of the television shows, the media was getting this wrong. They said he fled rehab, went back up to Seattle, and bought a shotgun, and he may be suicidal. In fact, that's the way the missing persons report reads that Courtney Love herself had filed. But Kurt had bought that shotgun before he left for rehab, and he bought it for protection. It was a light load shotgun. It was designed to scare people away, not to kill somebody. 20-gauge shotgun, it had a light load shell in it, which means that it didn't have a lot of firepower. And I never insinuated it wouldn't kill somebody up close. He got it to scare people off the property. There was no gate or fencing around the property or anything. Anybody from the park right next door could just walk right through the bushes up to his front door. And he was having that happen. So his best friend, Dylan Carlson, went with him to buy the shotgun, and that was the reason, just to scare people away if he had to. But he didn't want to kill anybody. He would have bought a rifle probably if he wanted to kill somebody. But certainly that shotgun was powerful enough to commit suicide with, if I believed he committed suicide. And it was placed in his mouth. Just the air pressure alone, even if there were no pellets in that shell, would have done enough to kill him. I'm not saying that that shotgun could not have killed Kurt Cobain. I'm just saying that somebody else is the one that put it in his mouth and put his hand on the trigger to pull.
They released a statement, not to the press, of course, but to, relevant people at Geffen, etc. As long as Nirvana is unmanageable, we're not going to manage them. Well, I know bands with way bigger drug addicts than my husband in them that are huge bands. No one's dropping them. I think we're going out to pull this whole righteous bullshit attitude. We've got to live. There's always drama. Well, little people, little problems. Big people, big problems. So I'm on his side with this. He shouldn't have to go to rehab to prove to Gold Mountain that he's a good little boy.
And his dad, there was this whole intervention thing with Gary. It was like he was trying to turn into Kurt or something, And the reason Kurt liked him was because he was happy and funny, and believe it or not, he was
believe
really
me,
if
Callie wasn't involved in this at all, I'm the first one that wants to get him out of it, and we can do it really quick by just doing a polygraph.
If it goes in, and the rumor, once somebody, I deny it, and I can deny it all the way to the bank, and actually people will believe me if I deny it, and say, it never happened.
Someone else was using Kurt's credit card. Courtney said he didn't have a credit card with him. We found out later that he did have a credit card at one time. In fact, that's what he used to order plane tickets in L.A. But credit card records showed that someone was attempting to use his credit card even after we now know he was dead. But several days later, when his body was found, the attempted uses of that credit card were immediately stopped.
I think it was Caitlin that gave Kristen her last dose. I don't think it was Chris Michelson. And then Caitlin and Chris Michelson got together, became boyfriend and girlfriend, moved to Portland for a while because after the memorial, I went over to, you were still around, I went to Caitlin's house with Kat, and broke her window in with a brick, and then being an asshole, put the heroin inside and asked her for drugs, but whatever.
It was Sunday morning, April 3rd, 1994. I just happened to be working at my Beverly Hills office at the time on another case. Normally I wouldn't have even been there. But the phone rang, and it was Courtney Love. I didn't know who Courtney Love was at the time. I learned as I went to the Peninsula Hotel and sat down and talked to her. And she told me about how her husband, Kurt Cobain, had just fled a rehab in Marina del Rey. So that's how it all began, and it went from there. I'd been involved in missing persons cases before, and people that have turned up dead after they were reported missing. So I'm always alert to red flags that pop up, and some red flags started popping up immediately from some of the things that Courtney was telling me, and some of the outright lies and contradictions that she said during our very first meeting. So when I left the meeting with a fellow that was working for me named Ben Klugman, as we walked down the hall, I said, we're going to document this case really well. So we did. I began recording every conversation I had with Courtney during the entire period that I worked for her. And by the way, she never did fire me. In fact, after I wrote her a letter 30 days after Kurt Cobain died, letting her know of my suspicions, rather than firing me, she started playing cat and mouse and hiring me to do other things to keep me distracted and keep me on the payroll, thinking that that would make me happy, I guess, and that I wouldn't go any further with this. But I worked for her for another 7 months before doing the first Go Gross radio show, and it was only after that that she stopped using me for anything. I started recording on April 3rd. I was practically in constant contact with Courtney night and day for the next week or so. After our first meeting, when Ben and I were leaving and walking down the hall of the Peninsula Hotel, something didn't seem right. Tape recording telephone conversations is illegal in California. I was about to do something that I knew to be illegal, but I was also prepared to stand before a judge and a jury and say why I did it, and let them decide my fate. I knew it had to be done because this was so fishy, and the stuff she was telling us right from the beginning was so contradictory and made no sense whatsoever, and I saw her as being extremely domineering and manipulative to her own husband, and he was missing. And she didn't want to go up there to find him. She wanted us to go up there to find him. If I'm married and my wife is missing and I'm trying to convince people that he's suicidal, I'm going to be up there myself. I'm not going to stay in L.A. and hang around. But she cared more about her record that was coming out, and she had somebody else go up to Seattle. I've never claimed that Courtney was up there and that Courtney pulled the trigger.
And,
you're the one that filed the missing persons report.
Yeah, and I'll totally come forward with that because people wouldn't take me seriously.
Yeah.
The police report says that it was Wendy Cobain, Kurt's mother, that filed the report. But I found out that it was actually Courtney that filed the report, and I questioned her about it, and she admitted to me that, yeah, she was the one that filed it. And that's why it was worded in the way that it was worded, that he left Seattle, bought a shotgun, and may be suicidal. Yeah, Courtney Love was with me in Los Angeles when Kurt actually died. I was hired while he was still alive, but he died, I believe, late Sunday night or early Monday morning, anywhere from 10 or 11 o'clock at night on Sunday night to 5 or 6 a.m. Monday morning. And I was on the phone constantly with Courtney all through the day Sunday. In the middle of the night on Monday night, she'd call me at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. She was up at all hours. Trigger. Unfortunately, it would make it easier if I could just put this on one person. Like I said, then we get rid of this word conspiracy. It would just be a murder theory. But Callie was at the house, and I know he knows a lot. I know he was involved in covering up. I know he was involved in that letter that was left on the stairs. But I have said from day one that Callie, otherwise known as Michael DeWitt, was involved in a conspiracy with Courtney Love that resulted in the death of Kurt Cobain. And I've always said there are others that may have been involved, but I believe for a fact that Callie and Courtney Love were involved in this. And since it was two or more people, that's what makes it a conspiracy. I never believed that it was a deliberate cover-up by the police or the coroner. Now, the coroner happened to be friends with Courtney, and I think what he did was unethical and dishonest, but you see that everywhere you go. You even see very good people doing bad things and making bad mistakes. But I've never seen this as a huge conspiracy involving dozens of people other than Courtney and Callie and possibly one or two other of their friends.
So, I'm at the same place. I feel that there's a possibility that this was a suicide. But, boy, when I start going through my notes and refreshing my memory about everything that's gone on and what people are saying, did you hear what Dylan is saying now?
No. I mean, I read Doug's article.
Yeah.
But that's all. What is he saying?
He's saying that he didn't even know that the greenhouse was there. He said, after all of the times I've been up to the house, I never even knew about that room above the garage.
Such a lie.
When Duff told me that he made that statement, I said, oh, now wait a second. Now that I can tell you for sure is definitely a lie, because I turned to Dylan right after I heard on the radio where they found the body, and I said, what house above the garage? And he said, oh, that's the greenhouse. No, in fact, I said, what's the greenhouse? That's what I asked, because they said he was found in the greenhouse. And I said, what's the greenhouse? And Dylan said, oh, it's just a small room up above the garage. And I said, well, why didn't you go in there? And he said, well, it's just a real small room. Last time I was up there, they just had a bunch of stuff stored in there.
Wow.
In talking to Dylan last night, I said, I might not have even mentioned your name then. I might have just said it was somebody that was standing next to Courtney or something and overheard Courtney tell you to check the greenhouse. And he said, no, she never told me to check the greenhouse.
Wow.
So...
I mean, that's, it's obvious that they're lying.
Yeah.
Maybe tonight if you could come over again?
Yeah, that's fine.
Stuff I want to show you.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. I just, there's some stuff that was left at my house that I never thought to really look at.
Yeah.
To look at all, quite honestly, until last night. And I guess I should talk to you.
Are they Kurt's writings?
No, hers.
Oh, okay.
That's Rosemary Carroll. That was Courtney Love's own entertainment attorney, who herself was suspicious of Courtney Love's involvement. She had an office near my office in Hollywood, and when she suspected that I thought something was wrong, she gave me a call, and I went up to her office, and when I walked in, she put her head down on her hand and started shaking her head back and forth, and she finally lifted her head up and says, Tom, Kurt wasn't suicidal. He wasn't suicidal, Tom. And then she's the one that told me that just a couple of weeks earlier, Courtney had called her and asked her to get the meanest, most vicious divorce attorney she could find. So Rosemary Carroll, Courtney's own attorney, her own private investigator, and her own attorney, both worked together on this behind the scenes. I have a lot of recorded phone calls with Rosemary Carroll also, where she highly suspected Courtney's involvement in Kurt's death.
What should I tell the Associated Press? I mean, should I call and confirm it so that it goes out and say I was there?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm just giving you my gut instinct, okay? I think you may end up regretting that you did it, okay?
How come?
Just because of all of the fringe problems that that you might have. And
I don't know, my record's coming out in like a week.
Yeah.
So, and I've learned the value of this. I didn't think it when it first happened, but all publicity is good publicity to a certain degree, unless you're Michael Jackson. And he left, and I had come down to L.A. with the baby to support him, and our nanny to support him. And when he left, I got very depressed, and had to be hospitalized for some sort of nervous breakdown. I could say that because as a hospital worker, that way there's no drugs involved.
Yeah.
And, the sympathy goes to me, and Kurt doesn't get in any trouble because it looks like he's not supposed to be in rehab in the first place. That he felt pressured, and so he jumped over the wall. All right? How's that first been? Then it appeared that I attempted suicide.
First of all, you already know that she has reported to the police that he's suicidal, and yet she's talking like this to me. This is before the body was found.
But, I don't know. The press always perceives me as, completely tragic and fucked up anyway, and I have, a record coming out, so, selfishly, it might even help sell records.
My other concern, too, and you're in a better position to judge this than I am, but, could this cause a problem later on down the road if something ever does seriously go wrong or something happen to you and he thinks it's a trick again,
Well, I just won't tell him it's a trick ever. It's like one of those things, one hand washes the other.
Well, you don't think he would ever find out that you never really were in the hospital?
No. No one will tell him. The people that are so unethical with the people that I had to do this, I paid.
She's formulating how she's going to manipulate the media, and this is her specialty. This has always been her specialty, is manipulating the media, and they buy it hook, line, and sinker. It's amazing any background that anybody ever does on me, they'll never find any dirt on me. Yet somebody who openly admits that they lie. She said this in the press dozens of times. They just take whatever she says and they print it as gospel.
But when I picked up that note and read it, it sounded phony to me.
Didn't it sound terribly phony?
It sounded like a set-up letter.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. When I first found the letter, I had no doubt that Callie had written it, but it still looked strange to me. The letter just didn't make sense. It looked phony.
Right, well, it was not written it wasn't a sincere letter.
Right, yeah, it sounded like
I thought Callie wrote it because he knew that Kurt was dead.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I felt.
Well, that refers to a letter that was found on the stairs the second time we went to the house. It wasn't there the first time Dylan and I went there the first night on Wednesday night, but on Thursday night, all of a sudden there's this letter written by Callie, the male nanny, sitting on the stairway. And Courtney's own attorney agreed with me, and she knew Callie very well also. Callie was a junkie, but yet he was left in charge of the baby all the time. But it just read phony. There's a copy of it in the case study manual. If you look it over, anybody with any brains can tell that this was written for me to find. That was the only purpose of that letter.
We did not have any plain Valium in the house. And that's what was found in his bloodstream. And we had Klonopin, and I asked Nicholas, can you tell the difference between Klonopin or Rohypnol? And he said, no, it was Valium, diazepam. And that was what they were giving in that, at Exodus. So somehow he got Valium. I want to know where he was for 4 days. For 3 days. That's what I want to know.
Well, you said you don't think it happened on the 3rd, but I'm saying...
That's what you told me, and I don't believe that anymore.
I said either the 3rd or early Monday morning, which would be the 4th. I don't believe anybody actually saw him after 7:30 Monday morning. And I believe that anybody that says they did is lying.
And, did you read the article in Us Magazine?
No.
There's an article in Us Magazine that's out now on the stands. It's just mainly a one-page thing, but it's real small print. It's a pretty long article. And a picture of Kurt Cobain, a big picture. And in there, there's a quotation supposedly from the suicide note. And It says, "I can't live my life like this any longer," something to that effect. I have it right in front of me. That's not in the suicide note. And the only people that have the information about what's in the suicide note is Courtney and me and the police, So they had to have gotten that from Courtney, to the best of my knowledge, and that's not a statement that's in the suicide note, but yet it's a statement that I feel she wants people to think.
Right.
There was no suicide note. The police in their reports refer to this note that was found on the scene as a suicide note without ever releasing it to the public. I tricked Courtney later into giving me a copy of that note, but without that ever being released, no one would believe that was a suicide note. There's nothing in there that says anything about suicide. The closest thing that comes to even hinting that this was even a depressive note was, "I'd rather burn out than fade away," which is an old rock term that's used. I'd rather quit while I'm on top than have people lose interest in my talent. And that's all Kurt was saying. He didn't want to be involved in the business of music anymore. He just wanted to play and enjoy himself.
I'm going to support whatever you do. If you don't want to do Lollapalooza, fine. I could have done Lollapalooza this year, but I can't go on tour with Kurt because everyone will say, "Oh, he got it for her." But I was offered it first. So, I don't know. It's ridiculous. And, I'm certainly not going to, Kurt's got enough power that he'd be getting the back end. I'd come off of Lollapalooza with less than $100,000. But it would sell my record. But I gave that up so that Kurt could go out and make nearly $10 million.
Everybody but Courtney Love that surrounded Kurt Cobain during that period of time said he was happy and upbeat, including his best friend Dylan Carlson. When I met with him and drove around with him in Seattle, he said Kurt wasn't suicidal. And this is the guy that Kurt hung out with the most up there.
I don't think that he was out at Carnation, and I don't know why Courtney's trying so hard to convince people that he was, and she's got the police convinced because they're saying that that's where they think he was for a couple of days.
What's amazing is that she can do this.
That first part was from Rosemary Carroll, where she said, "I don't know how she can do this, how she can get away with this." She was basically telling me how surprised she was that Courtney was able to manipulate the media so well, because Rosemary was like Courtney's right-hand person. She traveled with her and was with her all the time, and she just couldn't believe what was going out to the media as compared to what was really happening in real life. I met with Rosemary not only at her office, but at her house one night, and the documents she was showing me were the phone records from the Peninsula Hotel from Courtney, showing that Kurt tried to call her there once, and a copy of what appeared to be practicing handwriting, different handwriting styles, and that was very suspicious to Rosemary Carroll. Courtney had left her backpack at her house, and Rosemary started going through it and found this stuff. Here's Courtney's own attorney turning over evidence to me.
That suicide note is a pastiche of things that he had written before, I think, and of someone copying his handwriting. This is my theory, and it's a lot of it's intuition.
Yeah.
I think all of that weirdness with Callie and being obviously living in the house for several days while there was Kurt's corpse in the other place.
Yeah.
I think it had to do with the suicide note.
There were a couple of things in the news that were highly inaccurate but caused people to believe it was a suicide. First, Kurt Cobain was not barricaded inside the room, which was reported by the media and was told to me by the police. When you read the police reports carefully, you realize there was a stool that was simply across the room on the other side of the room that led out to a balcony. There was a push and pull, like a bathroom door lock, a lock on the door. So anybody leaving could have locked the door and then just pulled it shut and it would have been locked. He was not barricaded. He did not leave his driver's license out so people would know who he was. That was written about and reported in the media, and that made it look so poetic. Like he was so concerned that people knew it was him. It turns out, you just read the police reports, the first officer on the scene found his wallet, took the driver's license out, and put it on top to take a photograph. That's how the license got that way.
But I believe you when you tell me that he knows something, and I truly believe that in my heart. I know he does.
Yeah.
You know he does.
Sure.
know, and I don't know what the hell it is. I think that he might have heard the gunshot, is what I think. If you're saying the third, I think he might have heard the gunshot.
I think
he was fucking terrified.
I think he knew Kurt was dead. You know, I'm almost positive he knew Kurt was dead before it came out, before the electrician found him.
Gosh.
And that's what I want to clarify.
I hope to hell that he didn't see it. I think he might have heard the gunshot, is what I'm thinking. I mean, that's what my gut instinct tells me. Poor baby, poor Kurt. Okay. I mean, he was Kurt's closest friend. Hard, but doesn't start off very nice.
Does it say anything suicidal in
it? It says one thing very definitely suicidal on the first page. It said, it's mean to me. It says, like, it says, Dr. Baker says I would have to choose between life and death. I'm choosing death. That's a quote on the note. All right?
Can the police have a copy of that?
They have to. Yeah, if they have a copy of the other one. Sure they do.
Then probably the strongest piece of evidence is Kurt Cobain was injected with 3 times a lethal dose of heroin. And there was also diazepam found in his system. Diazepam aggravates heroin. It makes it even more potent and stronger. Now, this doesn't mean he shot himself up with 1.52 milligrams of heroin. It would have taken at least 225 milligrams of heroin to reach that kind of a blood level after somebody is dead. But the most obvious questions, and all you have to do is think about this logically. If Kurt Cobain injected himself with a deliberate heroin overdose, why would he grab a shotgun and shoot himself in the head before the heroin even had a chance to take effect? This would leave his baby daughter, the love of his life, with horrible visual images of him to remember him by. If you want to commit suicide, why not just take the heroin and lay back and go to sleep with a smile on your face, knowing you're never going to wake up? Most times that people are killed by a staged suicide, they drug them first before they kill them. So it's not uncommon at all to find somebody who's been drugged before they've made it look like a suicide.
You know, I tried to get this dealer busted, and I'm dealing with a Detective Terry in Seattle Narcotics.
I would call Cameron with you right now, and you can hear it from his mouth.
I don't trust Cameron. In case you're not aware of that.
I didn't tell him I was calling you.
In case you're not aware of that, I don't trust a thing Cameron says. If he
what
wants
about the
Oriental
guy?
Send me a copy,
what about Kim?
I don't trust anybody on the Seattle homicide team right now. If they want to send me a copy of that Rome note, that would be appreciated, but just talk on the phone doesn't mean anything to me.
Sergeant Cameron, by the way, has died. He was the lead investigator in this. Detective Terry, who Courtney mentioned in that one audio that you heard, was murdered several weeks after Kurt Cobain's body was found. He's a narcotics detective that Courtney used to use to bust drug dealers when she needed help. He was a good friend of Courtney's, and yet he was a narcotics officer. And I'm not trying to defame him at all, especially for his family's sake. And I don't know that his murder had anything to do with this case, but he's gone. Most police departments get really irritated when especially a private investigator from another state comes in and tries to prove them wrong. And by the way, there was that part earlier from Matt Lauer where he was quoting the authorities as saying that they investigated this as a homicide, as they do in all cases. Well, if you read the police reports, even from the first officer on the scene, he says, "We are on the scene of a suicide." Everything in the police reports refers to suicide, and the shotgun was never even sent in for fingerprints until 30 days after Cobain's body was found. That alone proves they didn't investigate this as a potential homicide. It was a suicide from the moment they walked in the door, and I think they really believed it. I'm not accusing them of making any of this up, but they were set up by that missing persons report that Courtney Love had filed and had worded in her own words that he was suicidal.
Courtney, when I was up there before, you said you were going to have Callie come up so I could talk to him, and that never happened.
I couldn't get him to do it for me.
What I want
to be in a gentle pig with that girl.
What I'm getting at is talk isn't going to get us any place. I don't care if they promise to come or if you say you're going to get them down or anything.
I know, but if I could see the county coroner on the fucking phone right now.
But it's not going to mean a thing to me until they walk in the door. That's what I'm trying to say.
I understand.
Okay.
I understand.
Well, Anybody that knows Courtney Love and her history and has ever dealt with her in her personal life knows that she doesn't take that kind of attitude from anybody without calling them names, without yelling at them. What Courtney Love should have done with me right at that point is said, F you, using as much profanity as possible. You're a stupid idiot. I don't need to talk to you. I don't ever want to see you again. And she just should have climbed all over me like she's climbed all over so many other people for doing so much less. I mean, I was accusing her of being involved in her husband's murder, and she's talking to me like she's afraid of me.
The only thing that bugs me is why is his blood where his feet are?
Well, there's a lot more than that about it that bugs me, though.
Why is his blood where his feet are? Why is that the only place where there's blood? And then I have a sheet.
I've never heard that before from anyone.
No, that's where it was tugged.
To begin with, for the first couple of months, I thought that Kurt probably had committed suicide. But there was something that just smelled really bad. It didn't make sense. Things that Courtney was saying and telling me and having me do just didn't add up. There was so much going on behind the scenes, and yet I was hearing other things in the media other than what was really happening. So it took me 7 months to reach a final conclusion. I was getting more and more suspicious as things went on, but it was only after 7 months of intense investigation that I was finally willing to come forward and speak out publicly. And you talk about risking your career to come out against the person that hired you and accuse them of committing a crime. If I was wrong, first of all, I could have been put in jail myself just for doing that, besides the lawsuits and everything else that I'd be paying off the rest of my life. So it was a risky thing for me to do, and that's why it took me 7 months to get to the point where I knew I had to do it. Those cases you see on 48 Hours and 2020 and all that, when people say, why haven't the police done anything, etc. In most of those cases, when the police have made an arrest, and even later when Alan Dershowitz or somebody comes along and proves with DNA evidence that the person that is sitting on death row is innocent, and they finally get released, and they even put somebody else in prison who admits to committing the crime, they go back to the original detectives and prosecutors, and those people still refuse to admit that they made a mistake. It's political. They don't want to look like a fool. They want to get promoted, and it's human nature. I only got one letter from her attorney slid under the door of my office that I picked up and I read and filed it away. I never responded to it, but they were threatening me with litigation and saying, let's get together and see if we can work this out in your favor, that type of thing. And you can read between the lines, and you know what they were saying. Hey, how much money is it going to take to make you go away? And I disregarded that and moved on. This wasn't about money. It was about what I believed to be a murder.
I can't live with a drug addict. And if he can't, stop being a drug addict, I don't know what to do. What I'm afraid of is that Trent can sleep 4 hours.
Yeah.
He does that a lot.
Yeah.
And get up and go work.
Yeah. So you'd rather have Chris go and check into the hotel right away then?
Yeah. Because it is a lot of money, and it's Francis's money.
Well, this whole conspiracy theory thing, people automatically roll their eyes when they hear that terminology, but thousands of actual conspiracies occur across the country every day. It simply means that more than one person was involved in planning and having the ability to carry out a crime. If I believed that Courtney Love acted alone or some other person acted alone, it would simply be a murder theory. No one would be able to call it a conspiracy theory, and that's had a lot to do with the press making a circus out of this whole thing. The word conspiracy that they don't even understand. Dr. Hartshorn died in a hang gliding accident. El Duce got killed by a train just weeks after his interview for the film, Kurt and Courtney, by Nick Broomfield. So we keep hoping something will change up there. All I've ever really asked for is change the finding from suicide to undetermined. Just do that. There's so much evidence and there's so much proof that there was a jump to judgment here that why not change it to undetermined? And I'll tell you why not. Because it would create a media frenzy that would force the Seattle authorities to do something and to really look into this.
Do you still have all the notes? The note from Rome and the original note here from?
Yeah, Detective Cameron gave me back the note from Rome, and he said, I would destroy this if I were you. It's not going to do you any good.
He he told you to destroy it?
That's what he said. He said it was the day after Kristen's death. I'd been bugging them for the notes back for like.
So you got rid of the original note that.
I burned it, and as I was burning it in the fireplace. No, that's the safe deposit box.
But the suicide note from Rome you burnt?
Yeah, and as I was burning it, this huge pop went off, and like, it was just really weird. Everyone ran upstairs. They thought I'd shot myself, and like little pieces of nothing else.
You do still have the note from Seattle, though.
Yeah.
The one that I got a copy of.
Yeah.
You've got that.
It's in a safe deposit box. Okay. It's on red pen, and it's on an IHOP, because I went to the IHOP.
That would help, too, to be analyzed. We could determine whether Kurt wrote that whole thing.
Well, it's gone. But I bet they have, I'm sure they have a copy of it in Olympia. They had to the graphologist.
If it's there, sooner or later we'll see it, and then there shouldn't be a problem.
The reason why they gave it to me the day after Kristen died is because I'd been bugging them, and here I am up in the news again, and they realized they better get off their fucking asses and bring me my note.
Now, what about the other note? You mentioned in Rolling Stone about another note that he wrote to you.
It's like a letter, and it's not really like a suicide note. It's like, it seems more like it was like in a sealed envelope, and it was just like to me, and it seems like he wrote it in rehab.
Where'd you find it? Where'd you get it?
It was in my bedroom under my pillows.
Under your pillows?
Yeah. And I didn't tell anybody about it, but Rosemary, and I told Sergeant Cameron about it.
Yeah.
I let him see it.
There's only one problem with that, Courtney.
What?
I looked under your pillows, just like we looked under your mattresses. That's how I found the rope note between your mattresses. That note wasn't under your pillows on the bed.
It was, and I showed it to Sergeant Cameron, and he can tell, he can prove it. I own it. I'll show it to you, if you want to see it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it, but what I'm telling you is it was not there the night before the body was found, or the night before that, because you can ask Dylan about this. We took the pillows up. We were looking for drugs. We looked under the mattresses. That's where the Rohypnol was. There was no note in it.
Right. It was in a long legal envelope, white envelope that was sealed. It had my name on it, and it was definitely Kurt's writing, and it was right under my pillows.
Yeah, okay.
Like I have a bunch of pillows on that bed. It was right there.
All I can say to that, Courtney, is if you say so, that I looked.
It's like little pieces of paper, and it says there were 3 or 4. I think there were 4.
Why would somebody tell you to get rid of that?
Because it wasn't really nice. They talked about getting a divorce.
In addition to the note that the police called a suicide note, in the December issue 1994 of Rolling Stone magazine, I picked it up. Courtney was on the cover, and I read the article, and she started talking about a second note, another note that Kurt had left for her. So when you listen to these tape-recorded conversations, you'll hear me asking her about this second note, and she starts describing. She had no idea about things that I had done before I started asking her this, but she tells me, it was a note he left me. I found it under the pillows. Right away, of course, that tells me she's lying, because it would have been in the police report. She would have been committing a crime by withholding it from the police when there's a dead body at the scene. It was never listed in the police report. It was never mentioned by the police when I met with them and talked to them or anything. So I started questioning her about that second note. And when she was done, I said, there's only one problem with that, Courtney. Dylan and I, when we were in the house the night before the body was found, we looked under the pillows. We looked between the mattresses. We looked under the bed. You'll hear that discussion with me and Courtney. And all she can say is, it was there, Tom, it was there. Well, I know for a fact it wasn't there. She didn't know that we had been in that bedroom and looked in the places where she said that note was. So that note came from somewhere else, if it even exists. We've never seen it. She even said it wasn't really like a suicide note, and she said it says something like, I'm leaving, I don't know where I'm going, please don't follow me, I'll be there to protect you. But in the Rolling Stone interview, she made it sound like it was a suicide note, even though the things that she quoted that were supposedly in that note had nothing to do with suicide again. just like the note the police had. And the note from Rome, by the way, you'll also hear on the recording, she told me that Sergeant Cameron from the Seattle Police Department told her to burn that note, that it would never do her any good. You'll hear Courtney Love telling me that Sergeant Cameron told her to burn that Rome note, and she did. And she describes what happened, and it went up in the air, and there was a pop and whatever. But she's destroying evidence. Evidence that could have proven he committed suicide if it was still there, and if it was really a suicide note like she was telling the press. I call it briefcase bullies because we don't need a organized mafia anymore. All we need is high-paid attorneys. If you can afford to spend money on a very expensive attorney, they can intimidate anybody with money into an out-of-court settlement. So why should somebody take a chance on a story like this if they're working for a network or a magazine that might be worth millions of dollars and risk a lawsuit that at the very least they know they're going to settle out of court for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and if it ever went to court, they know that they could possibly, because you never know what a jury's going to do, lose millions of dollars. Even during the early interviews with radio stations, I said that on the air. Please, I would love you to sue me. But she never has, and I've told the media, I've told radio, television, magazine writers, anybody that's had any contact with me about this case, I've said, Courtney will never sue anybody over this, because then we'll be able to depose her. And a deposition's actually more fruitful than testifying on the stand in a court case.
I think someone went through his notebook, found passages that could plausibly be cobbled together to suicide, and traced them.
They were traced?
Yeah. Or forged or something like that.
Well,
are you taping this call?
I tape all my calls.
Shit. Tom?
Do you want me to turn it off?
Yeah, I mean,
She ought to say that in public. She ought to say that I'm lying about that if she really believes that.
Well, see, she wasn't a great
and then sit back and watch me prove that she did say it.
Rosemary gets hysterical and says a lot of shit.
Well, but the point is, you just said she says she didn't say it.
She said she didn't say anything that was on the transcript on the K-Rock thing.
Well, tell her to say that publicly. It's real easy to say it behind closed doors, but she ought to go public and say that. Sooner or later, she's going to be forced to.
Yeah, she read your letter. I don't know. Anyway, what else? Okay, I will, I just wish you had a conference on your phone, and that way you could, like
I said, you've promised me things before, and it didn't come through.
It's not something I really wanted to jump into. I've never gotten involved in anything called a conspiracy before, and that's part of the reason why I knew I had to do it, was because I didn't really want to do it. And there were a lot of copycat suicides. This really ate away at me. Courtney and I even talked about it while we were driving once when I went back up to Seattle after Kurt was found dead, and she talked about the copycat suicide. In fact, all she was saying is, everybody's blaming me for it. But she never went public and tried to get kids to stop. Over 60 kids that we know have killed themselves. And they didn't do it because Kurt died in a car accident. They did it because they thought this guy that they looked up to chose that as his way out. And he passed a polygraph by Dr. Gelb, who's trained the FBI in polygraph examinations, and at the time was considered to be one of the top polygraphers in the entire country. And El Duce passed a polygraph, and I sat down with Gelb after the polygraph was over with, and I said, is there any way this guy could have passed this thing and faked it? Because I've heard of different tricks that people can use to pass polygraphs. And Gelb said, no, not this guy. I sat in on the interview he did with Hard Copy. They're the ones that had him polygraphed also. They paid for the polygraph. And I sat in the room while Diane Diamond interviewed him and listened to his story and everything. He actually said, I thought she was joking. I didn't really think she was serious, but I was out of town or I probably would have done it. This guy really was a sleazeball, and that's why Courtney went to him. But since he didn't do it, there's no law against him saying I probably would have done it. And he thought that was funny, but that was the type of character he was. The hardest emails for me to read, and it usually comes from younger people that just don't understand the law or what a private investigator is, but they say, Tom, Tom, why don't you take her to court? Why are you letting this go? If I ever do write back, I try to tell people I have no more authority in this case than a high school student. I'm a private investigator. I'm not a police officer for any department anymore. I was at one time, but I have no authority other than to report what I've learned to the police, and then they have to take the action. Most of the television shows I've done, one of the first questions they say, what motive would she have? And I say the oldest motive in the world. Greed, fame, it all goes hand in hand. And people kill their husbands and wives for money and for a whole lot less than what happened here all the time. Well, even in the film, Kurt and Courtney, as much as I didn't like some of the parts of that film, it did accomplish quite a bit. In fact, I've never found anybody that watched the film that didn't believe that Kurt was murdered, even though they botched the medical evidence in the film. But they did interview the female nanny that was at the house at the time, or shortly before all this, and she said there was all this talk about wills all the time. All they kept talking about was wills, and it was just really strange. So when I was telling people that they were in the midst of divorce, and I was getting all kinds of flack for that, and people calling me names and nasty emails, but when I released the information of Courtney talking about a divorce, and he says he's leaving me and things like that, it caught on, and people realized, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. The heroin blood level, there are people that will say, well, it depends on their tolerance. That's the official response from the authorities. So my simple answer to that, as I said 15 years ago, just show me one other case where someone has died and there's been an autopsy and there's been a heroin blood level equal or higher to that of Kurt Cobain. And anywhere in that report, there's some kind of evidence that he would have had time to pick up a shotgun and shoot himself. And I use the example. A bunch of guys sitting around watching TV, one gets up, goes to the bathroom, comes back, sits down, keels over dead. If you find me something like that, you've proven that Kurt Cobain could have killed himself, because if somebody had time to walk from the bathroom and sit down on the couch before he dies, he certainly would have had time to pick up a shotgun. In 15 years, and with all their millions of dollars of money that they could spend on research, not one single person has ever come up with a documented case to meet my criteria. In the film Kurt and Courtney, Nick Broomfield, for some reason, I don't know if it was deliberate or accidental, he shows me saying, okay, just show me somebody that can stand on top of a roof and flap their arms and fly, and I'll believe it's possible. But until somebody can duplicate this, I'm not going to believe that it's possible. And then Nick shows a picture of a guy standing on one leg, and he says, after taking 3 times the amount that Kurt Cobain had taken. Well, I knew from my contacts with Nick Broomfield, I mean, we became friends over this, and I'd go to his office where he was editing the film during the time and all that. I knew that this man had swallowed methadone. He had not injected anything. He swallowed methadone. So I wrote back, and this is on the website, in my letter back to Nick Broomfield after I saw the film. I said, Nick, if Kurt Cobain would have swallowed 5,000 milligrams of pure heroin, there's no doubt in my mind he could have picked up a shotgun. But he didn't swallow it. He injected it. It was April of 2009. I was asked to speak at a law school up in Sacramento, and they had done a semester on my case. They turned that into mock trials. They changed some of the circumstances and names around and all that, but everybody knew it was about the Cobain case. And then after the last mock trial, they wanted me to come up and speak to the audience. And the audience consisted of Superior Court judges who are currently on the bench, several lawyers, attorneys, law professors, and law students. And I was received very well by everybody. There were some questions, but nothing negative. But I did have one Superior Court judge that I found his comment to be very interesting. He said, Tom, there's no doubt in my mind he was murdered. And this is a currently sitting Superior Court judge. Now, that doesn't mean that if he were sitting on this case, that just because he believes it was murder, that he would find anybody guilty of anything. This was just his opinion. Just like a jurist might sit in on a case and believe that a person is guilty, but if they haven't proven it in court, they're going to vote for innocent because they didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But just by reading the facts and reading the details on this is a guy who obviously knew the law very well and had sat on several murder cases before, and he said there's no doubt in my mind he was murdered. You get so tired of listening to hours and hours of her rambling and talking, just like anything else. Sometimes you read or you hear things over and over until you finally pick up on something.
That's true.
Well, that's an example of what I was talking about, how she gets her attorneys involved. And if anybody that was paying attention at the time will notice, a few months later, Courtney got a cover photograph of herself with wings on Vanity Fair as a makeup for this Lynn Hirschberg story, so that Vanity Fair wouldn't be sued over what they said and over what Courtney actually has later admitted, that she did do heroin while she was pregnant. That's all Lynn Hirschberg had accused her of doing, and Courtney denied it and threatened to sue. But Courtney later has admitted that she did do some heroin while she was pregnant with Francis.
I will never fucking forgive you. As a matter of fact, I will haunt you two fucking cunts for the rest of your goddamn life. Going and interviewing Lynn Hirschberg is called rape. That's what that's fucking called. That's called rape. Fucking bitch. Only somebody on the Bush Family Values Administration would think that Lynn Hirschberg had any kind of fucking hot interview at all. Or you two goddamn idiots that don't even fucking know about punk rock.